Okay, let's unpack this deep dive. Today, we're really digging into language itself, looking at something, well, something incredibly ancient.
Right.
So ancient, its true origins are basically lost to time, yet it seems to have this structure that's so sophisticated, so maybe even forward-thinking. It almost feels, I don't know, designed for concepts we haven't even thought of yet.
Exactly. It's this amazing paradox, isn't it? Something rooted way back in the past, but with this potential for the future.
That's the core of what we're exploring today.
Absolutely. And our source material for this deep dive, it's quite specific. We're working from excerpts of a text called Sanctity and Potential of Sanskrit.
Right.
So everything we discuss, it's going to be strictly based on what this source is telling us about Sanskrit's qualities, its history, its, future possibilities.
And our mission, really, for you listening, is to kind of cut through the complexity that can surround a topic like this. We want to guide you straight to the most important ideas, the key takeaways from these excerpts.
There's the nuggets of knowledge.
Exactly. So you walk away understanding what makes Sanskrit unique, at least according to this text, why people argue so passionately about preserving it today, and what its potential might actually be.
Think of it as a shortcut, maybe. A way to get informed quickly on the core points presented in this source.
Okay, so where do we start? The source lays the foundation, right? Its age, its character.
It does. And it makes a pretty bold statement right out of the gate. It calls Sanskrit not only one of the most ancient languages known to humanity, but also one of the most refined and sophisticated.
Wow. Okay. That's a strong start. Sets the stage immediately. This isn't just, any old language.
Not according to this text, no. It praises its qualities, calls it artistically beautiful, remarkably flexible.
And then there's that layer that, for me, is really intriguing. It says it's also a language of scientific precision, almost as though it were purposefully engineered.
Yes.
That phrase, purposefully engineered, it really makes you stop and think, doesn't it? What could the source actually mean by that?
It absolutely does. And the source seems to connect that engineered feeling back to the language's meticulously structured nature.
Okay.
And this structure is apparently so compelling, so interesting, that the text calls Sanskrit a perennial favorite among grammarians, etymologists, and linguists.
Right. Let's pause there for a second. Why those groups specifically? What is it about Sanskrit's structure that would make it such a playground for, grammarians studying rules, etymologists looking at word origins, and linguists studying language overall?
Well, based on what the source emphasizes later about how words are formed, you can kind of infer. For a grammarian, Sanskrit seems to offer these incredibly consistent, deep, maybe complex rule sets to analyze. It's not just random. It follows these intricate patterns.
Okay, so very systematic.
Very systematic. And for an etymologist, the way words are built from fundamental roots, which we'll get into, gives this remarkably clear view of how concepts and meanings develop over, potentially vast stretches of time.
Like a clear lineage for words.
Pretty much. And for linguists just studying language itself, Sanskrit is this rich case study of a language with apparently unique properties.
Yeah.
Especially its ability to generate new words. It seems almost designed for deep analysis.
That makes a lot of sense. It sounds like its internal design is just incredibly rich territory for anyone interested in how language works. But here's where the mystery really kicks in, and the source spends some time on this. Its origins are shrouded in mystery.
Yes, the text really highlights the incredible uncertainty around when Sanskrit in this sophisticated form actually merged. It points to the Vedas, the oldest surviving texts, as our earliest linguistic evidence.
Right.
But then it notes that even dating those texts is subject to, huge speculation.
And the range it mentions is just, it's mind-boggling, really, from maybe 1700 BCE, which is already ancient, all the way back to a staggering 75,000 BCE.
75,000!
And then, as if that wasn't enough, it mentions that some traditions even see these texts, and maybe the language itself, as eternal, like existing outside of our usual timeline.
Just pause and think about that scope for a second. 1700 BCE, that's late Bronze Age. 75,000 BCE. That takes us deep into the Paleolithic era, long before what we usually think of as organized civilization.
Right, deep human history.
Exactly, into the time frame of early human migrations, the development of complex thought. And then eternal just transcends history completely. So we're not just talking about a language that's, a few thousand years old. We're potentially talking about something on a completely different scale of human existence.
And the absolute crucial point the source makes from all this, the thing that really underlines the mystery, is this. Even these incredibly ancient texts, the Vedas, whether you date them near or incredibly far back, they're composed in an already mature linguistic form,
Uh-huh.
complete with complex meters and stylistic elegance.
And this is where that purposefully engineered idea starts to feel even more resonant. If the language in these like primordial texts is already fully formed, sophisticated, capable of complex poetry and thought,
Yeah.
it means its development, the process of becoming this refined and sophisticated system, must have happened before these texts were even written down or composed.
Which pushes its true origin point back even further.
Exactly, making it nearly impossible to determine. So the picture we get from the source is of a language that doesn't seem to have a clear, traceable evolution from simpler forms, the way many languages do.
Right.
It sort of appears on the historical scene in its earliest recorded state, already equipped with this deep structure and capability.
It's not like finding simple drawings, then later finding complex sculptures. It's like finding, I don't know, fully realized complex architecture at the oldest sites. That's a really unique linguistic situation, according to the source.
Absolutely. And this deep, mysterious past, it sets the stage for a historical journey that, while starting from such a high point, hasn't been smooth sailing. The source acknowledges that over time, the use of Sanskrit declined.
Right. And with that decline came loss, tragic loss, really. The source notes that countless literary treasures were lost to neglect and historical upheavals.
Yeah.
It just makes you pause and think about the sheer amount of knowledge, art, philosophy, science, maybe, from potentially millennia, that just vanished because the language holding it faded from common use.
It's a really sobering thought, isn't it, about how fragile knowledge can be when it's tied to one specific linguistic form. However, the source then points to a period where, even as its maybe original widespread use faded, Sanskrit found a really crucial new role. For centuries, apparently.
Oh, yeah.
It served as the link language across diverse regions of India.
A link language. Okay, that's significant. What does that mean exactly? How would that have functioned across a place like India, known for just incredible linguistic diversity?
Well, based on the text, it suggests that people speaking different regional languages could use Sanskrit as a kind of common tongue, especially, among educated people, scholars, maybe merchants, even in administration or religious contexts.
So it bridged the gaps.
Exactly. It was the language that allowed ideas, literature, knowledge to travel across these vast distances, connecting communities whose everyday languages might have been completely different. And the source says this role lasted arguably up until the British colonial era.
Wow. So for a very, very long time, it wasn't just some ancient relic. It was a vital working language that enabled connection and the spread of culture across a huge area.
Precisely. But then the source describes another shift, particularly during and after that later period. Its use became increasingly associated with specific social classes.
Ah, okay. So it started moving away from being that broad pan-Indian bridge language used across different parts of society.
Seems so, yes. And its practical use narrowed quite a bit. It became largely confined to scriptural study.
That's a big change from earlier when the source said it was used by a wide spectrum of users, from seers and poets to scholars, scientists, and the common man.
It is a big change. The historical path, as the source presents it, goes from this language of mysterious, ancient sophistication and broad connecting use to one much more restricted, both in who used it and what they used it for.
That's a really dramatic shift in its role in society. Still, even after all this decline and narrowing, and despite the losses, the source is careful to mention that the corpus of surviving Sanskrit literature remains vast and rich.
Yes, absolutely. A huge amount survived, even if it became maybe less accessible once the language wasn't so widely spoken or understood.
Right.
And this whole historical journey, combined with its ancient origins and unique nature, it brings us right up to the vital questions the source poses for today. It asks pretty directly, in our modern world, does Sanskrit still have a place? Can a language so ancient be revived for contemporary use?
And these aren't just academic questions, are they? Especially thinking about India, where so many modern languages have Sanskrit roots. The source even points out specific challenges there, saying the language finds itself without a clear custodian. It asks, who owns Sanskrit today? Could it once again become a national link language, or even find everyday utility? And I guess the big question underlying our whole deep dive, why should we even care?
Indeed. And the source suggests the answer to all that lies in Sanskrit's intrinsic strength its timeless design.
Ah, back to the timeless design.
Back to that idea of it being almost purposefully engineered, and it points specifically to this ingenious system of dhatus.
The dhatus. Okay, the source really presents this as the heart of Sanskrit's power, doesn't it? Its unique engine for flexibility and creating new things. How does it define a dhatu?
It says a dhatu isn't a complete word itself. Instead, it's a fundamental property or action from which words are derived. And crucially, these aren't tied to specific things we can touch or see, but represent abstract concepts rather than specific objects.
Abstract concepts, like core ideas.
Exactly. Think of them as the absolute basic building blocks of meaning, like the essence of to go, to know, to be, to see, but stripped down to their most abstract form, the fundamental action or property itself.
Okay. And the source uses this analogy, which seems maybe a bit surprising at first, but it's quite helpful if we break it down. It says, in modern computational terms, dhatus can be likened to classes, while words derived from them are analogous to objects in object-oriented programming.
Right, let's spend a moment on that analogy because, for listeners who know programming, it might click right away.
Yeah.
But for others?
Yeah, let's unpack it.
Okay, so in object-oriented programming, a class is basically a blueprint, a template for making things, which are called objects. The class defines the properties and the behaviors that objects of that type will have. So you might have a vehicle class, for example.
Right. The blueprint for vehicles says all vehicles have, say, speed, capacity, and can start, stop, accelerate.
Exactly. That's the abstract definition of what a vehicle is and what it does. Then if you want to create a specific vehicle, like a particular red sports car, you create an object based on that vehicle class.
So the red sports car is an instance of the vehicle class.
Precisely. It inherits all the properties and behaviors from the blueprint, but it has specific values. Its speed is maybe 200 miles per hour, its capacity is 2, its color is red, it can start, stop, accelerate because the blueprint says so.
Okay, got it. So how does that map back to Sanskrit and these dhatus?
So the dhatu is like the class. It's the abstract blueprint for a fundamental action or property.
Yeah.
The pure essence of going, knowing, seeing. It doesn't represent one specific act of going or one specific thing that knows. It's the concept.
Just the potential.
Just the potential.
Uh-huh.
Then, by applying the grammatical rules of Sanskrit prefixes, suffixes, endings, which are kind of like the specific parameters you give when you create an object from a class, you generate concrete objects. And these linguistic objects are the actual words we use.
Ah. So like a verb form meaning he goes, or a noun like knowledge, or an adjective like visible, or even a word for one who goes.
Exactly. All derived from that abstract potential shaped by the grammar.
Okay, I think I'm getting it. The dhatu is the pure abstract root, the potential for meaning, and the actual words are specific instances, specific manifestations of that potential, all built according to the language's rules. It's a system for generating words.
Precisely. A generative system. And the source argues that this system, generating words from abstract dhatus, allows for virtually limitless word creation.
Limitless. Wow. That sounds incredibly powerful. How does it enable that?
Because the dhatus represent these fundamental actions and properties, they aren't tied down to the world as it exists right now. They represent the potential for action or property. And the source really emphasizes this. It says the system is suitable not only for past and present ideas, but also for concepts yet to be imagined.
Okay, hold on. Concepts yet to be imagined.
That's the claim.
Yeah.
If you can think of a new action, a new property, maybe a new combination of fundamental concepts, the structure of the language, according to this source, gives you the tools, the dhatus, and the grammar to actually build a word for it from within its own resources without necessarily needing to borrow.
That's a profound claim about its design, that it's inherently equipped to handle the future, conceptually and technologically. It's built to name the unknown.
That's the argument being made, yes.
Yeah.
And the source gives us a really key illustration to make this abstract idea more concrete. The word kaga.
Ah, yes, kaga. Let's dig into this one. This is where the system kind of comes alive with an example. The source explains kaga, ka, literally means one that moves in the sky.
Right, and breaking it down, based on the source's explanation, it comes from ka, meaning sky or space,
Yeah.
and ga, which comes from a dhatu root meaning to go or to move.
So combine the root concept going, moving with the location sky space, and you get one that moves in the sky space. Simple enough.
But here's where that remarkable flexibility the source mentioned earlier really shows up. because the word's meaning is based on this fundamental descriptive origin.
Uh-huh.
The source points out that this single word, kaga, can be used to describe multiple very different things that fit that description, like a bird, an airplane, the sun, a planet, or even a satellite.
Wow. Okay, look at that list. A living creature, modern tech, a star, a celestial body, more modern tech orbiting a planet, all covered by kaga. How do you know which one is meant?
Well, the source clarifies. Its exact meaning is determined by context.
Right. So the conversation around it, the situation, that tells you if it's a bird or a satellite. You wouldn't actually be confused.
Presumably not, no. And this context sensitivity is presented as a direct result of the word's structure. It describes the nature or function moving in the sky, rather than being just an arbitrary label for one specific thing.
It's descriptive naming, built from roots.
Exactly. And the source argues this inherent adaptability, this ability to systematically coin terms using these fundamental roots and descriptions, gives Sanskrit an advantage. An advantage over languages that, it claims, must constantly borrow, invent, or discard words based on technological or cultural changes.
Ah, okay. So while other languages might need totally new, maybe unrelated words for every new invention, Sanskrit, in this view, can potentially just build a descriptive term from its own existing foundation.
That's the compelling argument for its potential longevity and adaptability. It suggests the language isn't just a fixed list of words, but a dynamic system for generating meaning.
Okay. Which brings us to how this principle is, or maybe should be, applied today, especially with new vocabulary for modern things.
Yes, the source moves right into that. It gives examples of modern words that it says have been successfully coined in Sanskrit using this principle. Systematic derivation from roots or existing terms.
Like what?
Things like patravara for paperweight, modu mudra for rubber stamp, alkani for pencil, and shitaka for refrigerator.
Okay, let's quickly look at those through that lens. Patra is paper, fara is weight or burden. Paperweight makes sense.
No.
Modu is soft, mudra is stamp or seal. Soft stamp.
Right.
Okani, you said, comes from a root for marking or writing.
Related to marking, yes.
And shitaka relates to coldness, refrigerator. Okay, yeah, you can see the pattern. They describe the object or its function using existing Sanskrit bits and pieces rather than just grabbing a word from elsewhere.
These are held up as examples where the language's internal engine, its generative power, has been used successfully for modern stuff. However, and this is a big however, the source introduces a crucial note of caution. It highlights that inconsistencies have crept in modern vocabulary creation.
And this is where that debate about Sanskrit's place today, which we touched on earlier, really comes into sharp focus, isn't it? According to the source, anyway.
Exactly. It contrasts what it sees as good internally derived coinages with others that, in its view, show a worrying trend. The good examples it gives are Divi Chakrika for bicycle and Lokyanam for bus.
Okay, Divi Chakrika. Divi is two, Chakra is wheel. So two-wheeled vehicle makes sense for a bicycle.
And Lokyanam, locus, people, yanam is vehicle, people vehicle, also descriptive for a bus. These follow that pattern of using Sanskrit elements systematically.
Right, but then what are the problematic examples?
Then the source points to examples it considers to show a creeping reliance on foreign terms, specifically railyanam for train and karyanam for car.
Ah, okay, see the difference immediately.
Right. It's pretty stark.
Yeah.
Instead of creating a term purely from Sanskrit roots and structure to describe what a train or car is or does.
Like the bicycle or bus examples.
Exactly. These terms just seem to take the foreign word rail, car, and basically tack on the Sanskrit word for vehicle, yanam.
So it's not building from the inside out, using the datus and descriptive logic. It's importing a label from outside and just kind of Sanskritizing the ending.
That's how the source presents it.
Yeah.
And it frames this as a really key point of tension. Some argue this is due to popular usage, but should popularity override linguistic integrity?
Ooh, that's a big question. Linguistic integrity versus popular usage.
It's fundamental, isn't it? Especially for a language like Sanskrit with this unique systematic structure the source describes. I mean, one view is just, well, languages evolve. They adapt through use. If people start commonly calling a train something based on rail, maybe that's just how the language changes in the real world.
Yeah, language does change.
But the source really pushes back hard against that. It questions whether popularity should trump what it calls the language's inherent linguistic integrity, meaning its consistent, systematic way of creating words from roots, from the datus.
So the source clearly thinks maintaining that internal system is more important.
It argues quite emphatically that There is no reason not to create Sanskrit terms for general objects, using the language's own built-in resources. It sees the borrowing as, well, unnecessary, a dilution maybe.
Mm-hmm. Does it offer alternatives then for train and car?
It does.
Yeah.
It provides examples of how they could be named using that internal descriptive system. Instead of railyanam,
Yeah.
it suggests lohapathayanam, which translates as vehicle that moves on iron tracks.
Oh, wow. That is much more descriptive. Loha iron, patha track, yanam vehicle. It literally describes the train by where it goes on iron tracks, using purely Sanskrit components. That fits the Kaga example perfectly, moving in the sky.
Exactly. It's applying that same principle. Describe its function or environment using the language's own roots. And for car, instead of karyanam,
What does it suggest?
it offers shakaya, shakika, or ratha. Now, these are likely older Sanskrit words for things like carts, wheeled vehicles, maybe even chariots.
Ah, so repurposing existing related terms.
Yes, the implication is that these could be adapted or simply preferred over just borrowing the English word car.
So this whole debate really highlights the tension, doesn't it, between, say, the pragmatic adoption of words that become common versus a principled commitment to using the language's unique generative structure.
Right.
And the source is clearly team structure.
Team structure, absolutely. It views the borrowing approach as a form of dilution.
Which brings us to the stakes involved, right, as the source presents them. Why does this debate over railyanam versus lohapathayanam, or the bigger question of borrowing versus internal creation, why does it matter so much?
Well, the source makes a really strong case for what's at risk if that systematic approach is abandoned. It argues quite forcefully that Sanskrit does not need to be diluted for convenience.
That's a direct hit on the idea that borrowing is just easier or necessary today.
It is. The source's position seems to be, look, the language has this amazing internal capacity through the Dhatu system to create terms for anything. So choosing to borrow instead is a choice that weakens or, dilutes that inherent strength.
So the source seems to view protecting that linguistic integrity not just as like an academic preference, but as something essential to the language's core identity and its future potential.
I think that's fair to say. And this leads directly to the source's call to action. It says Sanskrit deserves our respect and, more importantly, our stewardship.
Stewardship. That's an interesting word choice. What does stewardship mean in the context of a language? Who are the stewards? What's their job, according to this text?
Well, judging by the context, especially that debate over new words, stewardship, as the source presents it, seems to mean taking conscious, active responsibility. Responsibility for guiding how the language develops, making sure it upholds its unique structural principles, especially that generative power of the dhatus.
So it's not just about preserving old books.
No, it seems much more active than that. It's about deliberately using and developing your language according to its own internal logic, even when it might be easier or more popular to just borrow words from English or elsewhere.
And the stewards would be?
Presumably scholars, teachers, active speakers, maybe institutions. Anyone who actively works to create and promote these internally derived terms, rather than just passively accepting loanwords.
So it's about making deliberate choices for the language's evolution, prioritizing its unique structure over convenience or trends, and the final argument the source makes for why this stewardship matters. It ties back to that timeless potential again, doesn't it?
It does, yes. The source wraps it up by saying that by honoring its structure and potential, we preserve not just a language, but a cultural and intellectual heritage that has the power to thrive eternally.
Wow, that's quite a statement. It connects everything, the ancient past, the engineered structure, the generative potential, to preserving this vast cultural and intellectual heritage. And then it makes that final leap. If we treat it right, with respect, with this careful stewardship that honors its internal design, then this heritage, carried by the language, can actually thrive eternally.
Right. It's not just about keeping something alive, like in a museum. It's about ensuring it can continue to grow, to be relevant indefinitely, precisely because of that timeless design the source keeps emphasizing.
So the structure isn't just a historical curiosity.
Not at all. According to the source, it's the key to its past importance, its present potential, and its future vitality.
Okay. Let's try and bring this all together then for everyone listening. We've done a pretty deep dive into these excerpts from Sanctity and Potential of Sanskrit.
Yeah.
We started way back with that profound mystery surrounding its origins, the truly staggering age range suggested for the Vedas, and that key idea from the source, that the language seems to show up already mature, almost purposefully engineered.
Then we tracked its historical path, as described in the text, from potentially wide use long ago to becoming this vital link language across India for centuries.
Acknowledging, sadly, the later decline, the narrowing scope, the tragic loss of texts.
But also noting the vast richness of the literature that did survive.
Then we spent a good chunk of time on what the source presents as the absolute core of Sanskrit's uniqueness, that ingenious dhatu system.
Right, those abstract roots like linguistic blueprints.
Allowing for, in the source's view, virtually limitless word creation, ready for concepts present and future.
Vividly illustrated by that word kagabird, plane, sun, planet, satellite, all from one that moves in the sky, with context deciding the meaning.
And finally, we explored that central debate the source lays out about Sanskrit's place today, that tension between using its internal generative power to make new words systematically,
like dvichakaga for bicycle,
versus what the source sees as a creeping reliance on borrowing foreign terms, like railyanam for train.
Which led straight to the source's passionate argument for respect and active stewardship to maintain the language's integrity, arguing this is essential if we want to preserve a heritage with the power, potentially, to thrive eternally.
Okay, so here's a final thought for you to chew on, building directly on what we've explored in these excerpts. Given Sanskrit's described ancient, incredibly flexible structure built on these abstract datas, and the source's very strong claim about its potential for almost limitless, future-proof word creation, can this language really thrive eternally in our modern, fast-changing world just by sticking strictly to its internal principles? Or, as that whole debate around words like railyanam versus lohapathiyanam seems to suggest, is the powerful, practical pull of popular usage, the sheer convenience of borrowing from globally dominant languages like English, is that just an inevitable force? A force that will always challenge, maybe even undermine, that ideal of linguistic integrity and purely systematic creation?
Yeah.
What does this specific linguistic tension, as the source presents it for Sanskrit, tell us about the bigger forces shaping how any language evolves when it bumps up against rapid global change and massive external influence?